Welcome to the section on scientific research. What is it and why do we do it? Today we're going to go over the scientific method, the definition of research, research designs, research ethics, and some case studies. We'll also cover the Belmont Report. What you will learn today will be general information on the scientific method, information on different research designs and the purpose of each design and its analysis, ethical guidelines for conducting research, and how some research in the past was conducted and why we do it differently today. What you'll be able to do will be to understand the basics of the scientific method, identify different research techniques and when or why they might be used, and determine what is ethical or not when considering research design. What is scientific research? It is research that is a critical tool for successfully navigating our complex world. Without it, we would be forced to rely solely on intuition, other people's authority, and blind luck. While many of us feel confident in our abilities to decipher and interact with the world around us, history is filled with examples of how very wrong we can be when we fail to recognize the need for evidence in supporting claims. At various times in history, we would have been certain that the sun revolved around a flat earth, the earth's continents did not move, and that mental illness was caused by possession. It is through systematic scientific research that we divest ourselves of preconceived notions and superstitions and gain an objective understanding of ourselves and our world. To the right, I have a picture of trepanation, which is the practice of making a hole in the skull as shown here, which was thought to allow evil spirits to leave the body, cure mental illness, and other disorders. I know we covered this picture already in an earlier lecture, but I think it's amazing and it totally shows how far we've come. The goal of all scientists is to better understand the world around them. Psychologists focus their attention on understanding behavior, as well as the cognitive or mental and physiological or body processes that underlie behavior. In contrast to other methods that people might use to understand the behavior of others, such as intuition and personal experience, the hallmark of scientific research is that there is evidence to support a claim. Scientific knowledge is grounded in objective, tangible evidence that can be observed time and time again, regardless of who is observing. While behaviors are observable, the mind is not. If someone is crying, we can see that behavior. However, the reason for the behavior is more difficult to determine. Is the person crying due to being sad, in pain, or are they happy? Sometimes we can learn the reason for someone's behavior by simply asking a question like, "Why are you crying?" However, there are situations in which an individual is either uncomfortable or unwilling to answer the question honestly, or incapable of answering. For example, infants would not be able to explain why they are crying. In such circumstances, the psychologist must be creative in finding ways to better understand behavior. Trying to determine which theories are and are not accepted by the scientific community can be difficult, especially in an area of research that is as broad as psychology. We have an incredible amount of information at our fingertips, and a simple internet search on any given research topic might result in a number of contradictory studies. In these cases, we are witnessing the scientific community going through the process of reaching a consensus, and it could be quite some time before a consensus emerges. For example, the hypothesized link between exposure to media violence and subsequent aggression has been debated in the scientific community for roughly 60 years. Even today, we will find detractors, but a consensus is building. Several professional organizations view media violence exposure as a risk factor for actual violence, including the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association, American Academy of Pediatrics, American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, and the American Academy of Family Physicians. This being said, this doesn't mean that media violence causes actual violence. It means that it's a risk factor. The agreement here is that there is more risk associated with exposure to media violence than not being exposed to media violence. This means that we should strive to think critically about the information we encounter by exercising a degree of healthy skepticism. When someone makes a claim, we should examine the claim from several different perspectives. What is the expertise of the person making the claim? What might they gain if the claim is valid? Does the claim seem justified given the evidence? What do other researchers think of the claim? This is especially important when we consider how much information in advertising campaigns and on the internet claims to be based on scientific evidence, when it's a belief or perspective of just a few individuals that are trying to sell that product or draw attention to their perspective. We should be informed consumers of the information that's made available to us because decisions based on this information have significant consequences. One such consequence could be seen in politics and public policy. Imagine that you've been elected as the governor of your state. One of your representatives is to manage the state budget and determine how to best spend your constituents' tax dollars. As the new governor, you need to decide whether to continue funding the D.A.R.E program in public schools. D.A.R.E stands for Drug Abuse Resistance Education. This program typically involves police officers coming into the classroom to educate students about the dangers of becoming involved with alcohol and other drugs. According to the D.A.R.E website, this program has been very popular since its inception in 1983, and it is currently operating in 75% of school districts in the United States in some capacity and in more than 40 countries worldwide. It could sound like an easy decision, right? So, what do you think? Have you heard of this program? Do you remember it from when you were in school? Did you think it was good or helpful or not that great? On closer review, you discover that the vast majority of research into this program consistently suggests that participation has little, if any, effect on whether or not someone uses alcohol or other drugs. There's a video here that will be linked below. Some controversy exists. There's challenges with this D.A.R.E program. Some researchers believe that adolescent drug use is not linked to rational thought because adolescents often engage in unplanned behavior. No theoretical or empirical data support the self-esteem exercise used in D.A.R.E, and controversy exists regarding the relationship between self-esteem and drug abuse. The program also mostly focused on upper middle class schools for making classroom presentations about drug use. Studies repeatedly found that students who participated were no less likely to use drugs than students who had not gone through the D.A.R.E program. Other challenges with the D.A.R.E program include that in 2004, children were asked to submit to the D.A.R.E police officers pieces of sensitive written questionnaires that could easily refer to the kids' homes, and that a D.A.R.E lesson was called the 3 R's: recognize, resist, and report, which encouraged children to tell their friends, teachers, or police if they found drugs at home. In addition, the officers were encouraged to put D.A.R.E boxes in every classroom, and this was where students could drop drug information or questions under the pretense of it being anonymous. Officers are instructed that if a student makes a disclosure related to drug use, the officer should report the information to further authorities, both school and police. This applies whether the drug use was legal or illegal, harmless or harmful. In several communities around the country, students have been enlisted by the D.A.R.E officers as informants against their parents. Another study in 1992 by Indiana University, which was commissioned by the Indiana school officials, found that those who completed the D.A.R.E program subsequently had significantly higher rates of hallucinogenic drug use than those who were not exposed to the program. Additionally, Marcia Rosenbaum, who headed the West Coast office of the Lynn Smith Center, which is a drug policy reform organization, provided an opinion that reported in D.A.R.E's worldview, Marlboro Light cigarettes, Bacardi rum, and a drag from a joint are all equally dangerous. For that matter, so is snorting a few lines of cocaine. D.A.R.E isn't really education, it's indoctrination. Basically, what she was saying was, this is not good, right? This is saying every level of illicit substance use is the same, is equally dangerous. So, in her opinion, it was minimizing some of the worse or potentially more dangerous drugs and kind of maximizing others, which in turn could make students feel like, well, if cocaine isn't as big of a deal as cigarettes, or if cigarettes are as big of a deal as cocaine, perhaps that decision making could be skewed and they could be lumping all of these things together. Back in 2001, the Surgeon General of the United States placed the D.A.R.E program in the category of ineffective primary prevention programs. The U.S. General Accounting Office concluded in 2003 that the program was sometimes counterproductive in some populations, with those who graduated from D.A.R.E. later having higher than average rates of drug use, which we would call a boomerang effect. Some alternatives would be teaching safety measures for when students do choose to use. Professor Bonnie Halpern-Felschler from Stanford University said that the most important tenet of drug education is to be honest and to have a balanced perspective. We cannot lie and we cannot exaggerate to teens. This researcher directs Stanford University's REACH lab, which focuses on understanding, preventing, and reducing teen and young adult substance use, among other risky behaviors. Her lab maintains a high school curriculum called Safety First, which was initially developed by the nonprofit Drug Policy Alliance, which encourages young people to abstain from drug use, while also providing them with information to reduce their risk of addiction or death if they or their friends do choose to use. This concept is called harm reduction. First, Halpern-Felschler says students need to know the facts about drugs, including their benefits and their harms. For example, opioids like fentanyl have been used safely in healthcare facilities for decades to treat patient pain, but when used recreationally, either purposefully or unknowingly, it's extremely dangerous because very small amounts can lead to an overdose. She reports that the most important piece of the curriculum is not to use, but if they are using or they're in situations where they might be using, they are trying to keep them safe or as safe as possible. There are few studies that focus on harm reduction drug education programs in schools, and more research is needed to evaluate this efficacy. Experts told NPR that harm reduction could help save lives at a moment when teens are dying at alarming rates. A pilot study of this Safety First curriculum found it significantly increased high school students' knowledge of harm reduction techniques and behaviors and found a decrease in overall substance use. Here are some tips that are part of that program. If you're using drugs, the healthiest choice is to stop using, or at least cut down on how much and how often you use, if possible. Ideally, you're using drugs only as recommended by a doctor or a pharmaceutical label. But if you're not, don't take a lot of any drug. Wait and see how it affects you before taking more. Consider your mindset before using drugs. What you're thinking and feeling before and during substance use can affect your experience. Consider the setting. Where and with whom you're using drugs can reduce your chance of injury or death. Check the substance before you use it. Testing a drug for things like fentanyl can reduce the risk of harm. There are test strips available, but even the test strips are not always 100% accurate. Don't mix drugs. The effect of combining drugs may be stronger and more unpredictable than one drug alone. It could even be deadly. Also, know how to respond in an emergency. Spot the signs of an overdose. Call 911. Place someone on their side to prevent choking, and administer the opioid reversal medication that is available to you, if possible. We might need to use research in our own lives. When we do this, we need to remember to consider all possible perspectives and why the information is being shared from each particular resource that is sharing it. Now that we've talked a little bit about how to consider both sides of research, let's think about how we might look to research when making decisions in our own lives. Imagine you just found out that a close friend has breast cancer or that one of your young relatives has recently been diagnosed with autism. In either case, you want to know which treatment options are most successful with the fewest side effects. How would you find that out? You would probably talk with your doctor and personally review the research that has been done on various treatment options, always with a critical eye to ensure that you're informed as possible. Research is what makes the difference between facts and opinions. Facts are observable realities, and opinions are personal judgments, conclusions, or attitudes that may or may not be accurate. In the scientific community, facts can be established only using evidence collected through empirical research. This is a type of research that is based on observation or experimentation and is used to gain knowledge through direct or indirect experience. Empirical research is often published in peer-reviewed journals. Empirical research is basically research that the people who wrote that paper did themselves. Either they observed it themselves, they did the experiment themselves, they themselves were part of collecting this data. What do we mean when we say peer-reviewed? What exactly does that entail? A peer-reviewed publication is also sometimes referred to as a scholarly publication, an academic publication, and the peer review process subjects an author's scholarly work, research, or ideas to the scrutiny of others who are also experts in the same field, or their peers, and is considered necessary to ensure academic scientific quality. Please note, when we say peers, we don't mean friends. We mean people who are neutral, who do not know who the author is, or the author is hidden from view when these people or this committee are reviewing this paper. So it could be experts in their field, experts in a closely related field, or a combination of both. Research design. Empirical research includes a description of the research design, including the selection criteria, controls, and testing instruments. When we talk about research design, what we're really talking about is what kind of study was it? How long did it take? What kind of information did they get? All of those details. When we speak about selection criteria, we want to know how they found their participants. Did they find them all in one neighborhood, on one college campus, in one city? Were all of them college students? Were they college students from a certain region of the United States or some other country? We want to know the selection criteria. Also, we want to know the controls that were in place. So, what did these researchers do to ensure that they were unbiased and also the participants were as unbiased as possible when participating in this study? When we speak about testing instruments, what we're talking about is, for example, a survey. What survey did they use? And was that survey or questionnaire something that has been tested or proven to collect the information that it's intended to collect? So what does that mean? That means basically, say we have a survey that asks people about depression. Well, when that survey or that questionnaire first gets built or created, it gets tested over and over and over again to make sure that it's getting the information that we want. The questions are worded appropriately, people understand them, and they're able to respond in such a way that we're actually getting the information that we want when we use that questionnaire or instrument. Research methods. Empirical research can use either quantitative or qualitative research methods. Quantitative research uses numerical data to establish causal relationships, while qualitative research analyzes behaviors, beliefs, feelings, or other values. One way you can think about this is that quantitative research could be something like how many times a person performs a certain behavior throughout a day. You can count that, right? You can understand, you can watch a video of someone in an office and say, oh, interesting, they turn their chair 400 times an hour, or maybe they never turn their chair, but there's a number we can put with that, right? A quantitative number, quantity number. Qualitative is more about feelings. So if, for example, there was a survey asking people about how they felt about a certain political candidate. It might say, I agree with this ideology never, sometimes, usually, always, right? There could be a selection for us to pick from. So, while we do get some numbers from that data collection, it's not concrete numbers because everyone's perception of those questions is going to be slightly different. So that's the difference. Quantitative is can we count it? And qualitative is trying to kind of corral or figure out how to determine feelings or beliefs or things like that. Ethics. Empirical research must adhere to ethical guidelines such as obtaining informed consent from participants, protecting participant privacy, and minimizing the risk of harm to participants. Part of the process of scientific research is using the scientific method. Ideas in the form of theories and hypotheses are tested against the real world in the form of empirical observations. And those empirical observations lead to more ideas that are tested against the real world. Once we have an answer, we can repeat the process. The scientific process is circular. The types of reasoning within the circle are called deductive and inductive. In deductive reasoning, ideas are tested against the empirical world. In inductive reasoning, empirical observations lead to new ideas. These processes go together, but different research approaches place different emphasis on the deductive and inductive aspects. Let's talk about this some more. Deductive reasoning begins with a generalization, one hypothesis, that is then used to reach logical conclusions about the real world. If the hypothesis is correct, then the logical conclusions reached through deductive reasoning should also be correct. A deductive reasoning argument might go something like this. All living things require energy to survive. This could be your hypothesis. In this example, the hypothesis is correct. Therefore, the conclusion is correct as well. Inductive reasoning moves in the opposite direction. It uses empirical observations to construct broad generalizations. Unlike deductive reasoning, conclusions drawn from inductive reasoning may or may not be correct, regardless of the observations on which they are based. For instance, you may notice that your favorite fruits, apples, bananas, and oranges, all grow on trees. Therefore, you assume that all fruit must grow on trees. This would be an example of inductive reasoning, and the existence of strawberries, blueberries, and kiwi demonstrates that this generalization is not correct, despite it being based on several direct observations. Scientists use inductive reasoning to formulate theories, which in turn generate hypotheses that are tested with deductive reasoning. So, science involves both deductive and inductive processes. A theory is a well-developed set of ideas that propose an explanation for observed phenomena. Theories are repeatedly checked against the world, but they tend to be too complex to be tested all at once. Instead, researchers create hypotheses to test specific aspects of a theory. Think of it like this circle. There's a theory, we use the theory to form a hypothesis. We then design a study to test that specific hypothesis. We do the research, we observe, and then we create or modify the theory. Remember, a hypothesis is a testable prediction about how the world will behave if our idea is correct, and it's often worded as an if-then statement. For example, if I study all night, I will get a passing grade on the test. Pro tip, studying all night is probably not the best plan, because you'll be exhausted, and that will also impact your ability to recall information. Anyhow, the hypothesis is extremely important. It bridges the gap between the realm of ideas and the real world. As specific hypotheses are tested, theories are modified and refined to reflect and incorporate the results of these tests. Let's consider a specific theory and a hypothesis that might be generated from that theory. In a later chapter, the James Lange theory of emotion is something we're going to go over, and that theory asserts that emotional experience relies on the physiological arousal associated with the emotional state. If you walk out of your home and you discover a very aggressive snake waiting at your doorstep, your heart might begin to race and your stomach might begin to churn. According to this James Lange theory, these physiological changes would result in you feeling fear. A hypothesis that could be derived from this theory might be that a person who is unaware of the physiological arousal that the sight of the snake elicits wouldn't feel fear. So let's hold that thought for just a second and talk about how a scientific hypothesis is also falsifiable or capable of being shown to be incorrect. So we have to be able to prove it either right or wrong over and over again. Scientific research's dependence on falsifiability allows for great confidence in the information that it produces. Typically, by the time information is accepted by the scientific community, it's been tested repeatedly. Recall from our introductory chapter that Sigmund Freud has lots of interesting ideas to explain various human behavior. A major criticism of Freud's theories is that many of his ideas are not falsifiable. For example, it is impossible to imagine empirical observations that would disprove the existence of the ID, the ego, and the superego, which are the three elements of personality described in Freud's theories. Despite this, Freud's theories are widely taught in introductory psychology texts because of their historical significance for personality psychology and psychotherapy, and these remain the root of all modern forms of therapy. A brief explanation of the three parts of personality, according to Freud, would be the ID, which is the part of our personality that says, I want that now. I want the thing right now. Our superego is kind of the judge in our personality that says, well, okay, we may want that right now, but right now is not the best time. There's rules involved. That's not okay. And then our ego says, maybe we can compromise. Maybe we want to do the thing, but we can't do it right this second, but we will do it in a little while, right? So the ego helps us to kind of find a balance throughout our urges and the rules that we are made to adhere to throughout the day. To explain these concepts just a little bit further, on the conscious level, our ego does things like executive mediating between ID impulses and superego inhibitions. So it kind of tests reality, it's rational, and it operates mainly at a conscious level, but also a little bit of a preconscious level. The superego is our ideals and morals, striving for perfection. It's incorporated from our parents, usually, or guardians, and it can become a person's conscious. It operates mostly at the preconscious level. Then there's the ID. This is the unconscious level of thought or operation, where basic impulses like sex or aggression, or seeking immediate gratification, both irrational or impulsive, and this operates at that unconscious level. In contrast to Freud's theories, the James Lange theory does generate falsifiable hypotheses. Some individuals who suffer significant injuries to their spinal columns are unable to feel those bodily changes that often accompany emotional experiences. So, we could test the hypothesis by determining how emotional experiences differ between individuals who can detect the changes in their physiological arousal and those who can't. So, in fact, this research has happened. It's been conducted. And while the emotional experiences of people deprived of an awareness of their physiological arousal might be less intense, they still experience emotion. Let's do a couple of review questions. Scientific hypotheses are blank and falsifiable. Are they observable, original, provable, or testable? They're testable. Blank are defined as observable realities, behaviors, facts, opinions, or theories. Facts. Scientific knowledge is blank, intuitive, empirical, permanent, or subjective. Empirical. A major criticism of Freud's early theories involves the fact that his theories are blank. They were too limited in scope, they were too outrageous, they were too broad, or they were not testable. They were not testable. So here I asked the class to pick one of these questions to respond to and reflect on. The first is the D.A.R.E program that was described as that incredibly popular program at first in schools across the United States, even though the research consistently suggested the program was largely ineffective. How would you explain this discrepancy? The other review question option is that the scientific method is often described as self-correcting and cyclical. Briefly describe your understanding of the scientific method with regard to these concepts. This concludes the introductory section on scientific research.